Hey everybody, this is one of your hosts, Matt. I just want to let you know that the episode that you're about to hear has the crappiest audio in the history of audio. Um, we do apologize for that. We're having a little bit of issues with Skype at the moment, along with a new microphone set up on my end and some odd things on Vince's end. The discussion is really good if you can get through the crappy audio. We've tried to clean it up a little bit, but yeah, and there's not much we could have done. We're going to go ahead and put it out. Listen to it if you can. If not, we have plenty of other episodes that are way better produced than this one. Again, here's the episode. Hey everybody, welcome to the 3Cast. I'm your host, Matthew Weber. I'm joined by Vincent Hui.
Hey, what's up, guys?
Ricky is off this week. He had a death in the family, so he's dealing with that. So this is the 3Cast. We review things. We usually movies, TV shows, every once in a while a comic book. Usually we usually choose whatever, kind of suits our fancy, whatever we want to watch. And at the end of the last episode, Vince, you talked about a movie called The Untouchables, and that's what you chose. So why don't you tell us what The Untouchables is about?
Well, I thought this was good for you on a couple levels, Matt. So the first one is, of course, the reason why this spurred the whole conversation is because, as some listeners might know, we've been talking about Bond movies. We've been slowly but surely, maybe in a decade, we'll get through a lot of Bond movies. But the Bond movies are something that we've been looking at and just like saying in passing that there's it's dated stuff. So it's like the special effects, the music, the kind of treatment of women and minorities and stuff are always a problem. But I think this whole entire choice of The Untouchables was coming about from a discussion that we had earlier, which was, hey, has Sean Connery actually been in a good movie? Or does he actually really do any good acting? Well, today we're going to be seeing The Untouchables, which happens to be the one and only movie that Sean Connery, I believe, won an Oscar for supporting actor, playing that Irish or Scotsman. I don't even know. No, it wasn't. It was Scottish, but I think he was supposed to be Irish. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's like starts fighting with the other Irish guy, and then you have the Irish guy fighting with the Scots guy. It's just like, yeah, that's not the same accent. He's realized, wait, he's not Irish. So anyways, so that was one part where we were like, okay, let's talk about the Bond movie, talk about a decent movie that would kind of talk about Sean Connery's acting skills. And the other thing that I thought was really good was because, of course, Matt, we all know that you're a bit of an American history buff, so there's obviously a lot of artistic license that's taken on in historic dramas. We know that all the time. It's fictionalized, as you read, retellings of history. But I think that it's a fun movie. The Untouchables happens during the kind of 1930s, where it's pretty much prohibition has been underway in America. And, of course, at that point in time, the kind of crime syndicates, specifically in Chicago, were bootlegging a lot of alcohol into America, okay? And as part of the way to stop this and to kind of stop that kind of profiting off of illicit activity, the feds actually get involved. And the feds actually appoint this kind of non-Chicago cop, basically he's for the feds, named Elliot Ness. And he basically, because all the cops are corrupt, they're under the kind of pay of Al Capone, played by Robert De Niro. Elliot Ness, played by Kevin Costner, is charged with leading the Untouchables, this little super group. It's like the Avengers of the 1930s, right? Of people with various skills, whether it's street smarts or accounting or sharpshooting. You got these kind of basic skills that are there for an elite group, and it's a fictionalized account, of course. But he basically is, as the movie would put it, he's responsible for making sure he takes down Al Capone. So throughout the movie, we see instances where he's trying to take, Elliot Ness is trying to take down Al Capone, specifically hitting his, the alcohol racket. But then it turns out that the crux of the way to put him in jail is to, of course, bust him on, as we all know, Al Capone gets busted for not, murder, not for extortion or anything, he gets busted for tax evasion, right? So because of that tax evasion thing, it's this pervasive thing that kind of peppers through the entire storyline. Eventually, because it almost seems like not only is Elliot Ness's group untouchable, but of course, the mob is kind of untouchable. And it's not until the very last minute in the movie where basically, even when the prosecutor has got Al Capone dead to rights because he's pretty much got the ledger, they've kind of secured the bookkeeper for Al Capone. At the end of the day, it's still kind of Al Capone's kind of cocky because he feels that he's got even the judge under his pay. But of course, they switch out the juries, and thereby, of course, Al Capone is put in jail. Now, I've skirted over a bunch of issues, but I want to talk back about some of our friend Sean Connery's acting. So Sean Connery plays the beat cop who's never been kind of promoted because he's been honest. He's never been on the take from the mafia. So as a result, he's always been kept down as the beat cop. And he's the streetwise, kind of good-hearted, but kind of rough on the outside kind of guy. I thought that he was portrayed as a Irish person. It seems like Malone.
I don't know why they didn't just make him Scottish. I mean, America has Scottish immigrants. I mean, they could have just made him Scottish.
I wasn't sure how much I knew that, when American immigrants, it was like the Italians, then the Irish, then like the Italians, right? So there's always like specific focus on certain groups. I don't know if there was ever a persecution of the Scots.
Because around that time, obviously, the Irish and the Italians were the big groups coming here, but I mean, people were coming here from all over the place. I mean,
yeah.
They could have just made him Scottish because he was good in this movie, but he can't do a different accent to save his life. We've complained about it before. He just can't. And that fight scene with the Irish guy who did an Irish accent, like they should have just cut that part out because it just made his accent stand out even more. It was really weird.
Yeah, but I thought it was interesting though because we know that historic retellings of movies tends to be very, very, hit and miss with facts. And I think, yes, there was an Elliot Ness. And believe it or not, yes, there was. It took me a second or two to realize this, that there really was a Malone character. There was, but apparently they never actually met. Apparently, Elliot Ness, this is something that struck me. Elliot Ness is like all of 27 years old in reality when he starts down.
Yeah, he died in his 50s, so he died very young. He was also not. This movie portrayed him as a loving family man, which he was not. He had 3 wives. He also didn't have a daughter. He had an adopted son. So in this movie, he had 2 children. So they pulled that completely out of their asses. But
I think I know why, though, because I think that they were trying to really play up the untouchable thing, where it's like, that's why we make a big deal of, like, okay, make sure that whoever I get have no kids, have no girlfriends, have no wives, right? Because it was all about, like, look, it's going into bad stuff, and we know that family, and I think they make that point when it's like he has to evacuate his wife, or at least his, fictionalized wife and daughter, from his house, because it's like, look, the mob can get you and your family, and so like, good people will do bad things not because they're fundamentally bad, but because it's at the risk of, say, their family getting hurt. I think that's one thing that's kind of clear, at least to me, is that not every cop was on the take because they just wanted money, but also because there was like this intimidation, right? So it's not like everyone in Chicago was a scumbag. Everyone in Chicago a lot of people had to do bad stuff in that era was because it was also because of intimidation because of the mob, right? So, and cops were just as kind of suspect to that. So I thought that was interesting, but just going back to the whole issue of Sean Connery, I mean, like, he won a supporting actor role for this, Oscar for this, and you know what? I think that you got to take it with a grain of salt. Like, honestly, Matt, you've watched enough 80s movies to know that the acting and the kind of production value of 80s movies versus what we see now is really different, right? You're not going to see like Citizen Kane kind of stuff, but you're also not going to see stuff that typically you'd find in today's kind of cinema, right? So I think that Sean Connery's kind of gritty kind of character, was a pretty good send off in the 80s of like the kind of bad cop good heart kind of thing. I think that there were some scenes in the movie where I was like surprised, like, come on, that is a pretty good scene when he kills the dead guy. Like, you know what I'm talking about, right? And the American boy takes the dead body and like to intimidate the other guy that's being interrogated, he takes the dead body of another a bad guy and then like threatens him and then shoots him in the head to make the other guy that's about to be interrogated spill, right? So it's just kind of that, like, and that's pretty violent stuff. Like in the 80s, you gotta bear in mind, there's some rules that even in the 80s they set, and even in the 90s and current day we still do. Like you never see kids get hurt in movies, right? You never see like it's like for some reason full-on frontal nudity was never available. And I would say even in the 80s you would say that some of the ground rules were that you would never show explicit gore in detail, except unless you were like a horror movie. But whether it's the Al Capone taking a bat to the guy's head and then seeing the blood just kind of spew out of his head, or like when they shoot the guy in the head and then like his brains flutter on the back of the wall, or
blowing up the little girl.
Sorry?
Blowing up the little girl in the.
Yeah. Even though with the little girl, they don't show the little girl getting blown up. They just show the building blowing up. So they still adhere to the 1980s kind of Stranger Things kind of rules of cinema. But I think that the whole issue of having Sean Connery just like pulling out all the guns and doing all that stuff, that was just kind of fun to see. And I mean, I can understand why people liked his kind of mentor role. You got to keep in mind, this is coming up. Like, I'm not sure which came first, this or Indiana Jones, right? Because remember, the Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade came out about the same time, so it was the kind of renaissance of Sean Connery. Because remember, at this point, Sean Connery had retired from James Bond for a while, done a couple of random movies, but it was Roger Moore's James Bond, right? And so in the 80s, you kind of saw, there was a lot of hit and miss stuff with Sean Connery, and it wasn't until he starts getting his stride with stuff like this Untouchables and certainly his other big payout was of course Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. So those are two movies that I recall back in the late 80s, early 90s that really starts putting this guy up, as a renaissance or like a kind of revitalization of his career. So anyways, I just wanted to see what you thought on this movie, because we were talking about Sean Connery ad nauseum. And I just thought that this was like the movie that we should say like this is his penultimate benchmark of acting.
Yeah, this was a good movie, Vince. This was a very good movie. I really enjoy. There's some things that bothered me. Some of the acting was,
That's the James Bond level, like falls over the.
Well, yeah, it wasn't that bad. But a lot. Some of the like the action, the non-action scenes were pretty good. Like Kevin Costner, he can act. Sean Connery, he can act. Even like the B-list characters, they were pretty good. They didn't do a very good job of doing any character development for Al Capone. He was just, he really was a non-entity in this movie for the most part. He was in this movie for maybe 20 minutes. Grand total, he wasn't in it for very long. He didn't do very much of a character development at all. But outside of that, I don't know about you, Vince, but the sets in the scene, the physical world, they did an excellent job with it. Just the way they shot it, and like the buildings and
clean, man. I thought it was way too clean. I honestly, it looked like, to me, I felt a little bit like, okay, it's clearly a movie in the 1980s, but set in the 30s because the streets are clean. Like,
yeah, I suppose I could see that, but like at the beginning, even though he had a wife but he wasn't really a family man, that shot when you first meet his wife, like they did a really good job with that kitchen. Like it was like really, they did a really good job with that stuff, and yes, Chicago turned out, it looked really clean. I guess I didn't even really notice that, but they did a fairly good job of just kind of making it feel like. Sometimes these older films have more like a Mel Brooks kind of style where, yeah, they got the old style like Western buildings or whatever, blazing saddles, but then you pull out and you're in Hollywood. It kind of feels like that.
Like I would agree with you. It's just that there's two scenes in particular that stand out as like kind of like it's very clear to me, at least, that it was kind of this farce, right? The first one is that first scene when he does the first bust, where he blew, I don't know, the snowplow essentially into the Canadian warehouse, right, with all the maple leaves on the boxes. I was like, that is the cleanest kind of warehouse to smuggle stuff in that you've ever seen, right?
Yeah, and they were going through alleys and stuff like that, and like the alleys were perfectly like pristine too. I mean, like there wasn't a trash dumpster in sight.
Yeah,
I think about it. Yeah.
Exactly. So like that opening scene, maybe it's because it's dark, but even when you get inside, it was really, really pristine, right? And then to me, the other part that I found was kind of iffy was the courthouse. Not the actual court scene, but the actual courthouse itself, where like, he pulls out the assassin guy.
Ivy covered or something.
Well, it wasn't even that. It was just like the fact is that, okay, so they're trying to play up some historic fidelity with the fact that he needs the matches and he smokes inside the building, which kind of has to be used as a plot device, right? So you can see, oh, this is the guy that killed Malone, right? But the fact is that, look at the building. It is so clean. And yes, it is a court building, but it is so immaculately clean, in spite of the fact that at that point in time, you knew that the air would have been filled with smoke. It would have been hazy. It would have been like beams of light going through, because at that point in time, it would have been just like this nasty ass. Like, you take it for granted, okay, because you're a youngin', Matt. You take it for granted that buildings today have air conditioning, have filtration. People are smoking still. I'm not even sure if you were alive when buildings allowed people to smoke in them. I don't know, man. I'm of the era where you could smoke in planes, right? So, when you walk into that building, it would have been like, it would have been like a nightclub. And because it would have been all dudes and press reporters, it would have just been like this kind of gross air, the ground would have been nasty, everything would have been rough. So I just thought that it was interesting just to see those two different scenes where it was like clearly so artificial. Right?
Yeah, that's a good point. I didn't even think about that. The other thing that I really enjoyed but was kind of off about this movie was the soundtrack. So the soundtrack was actually pretty good. But it didn't really fit the movie, it didn't fit the time period, because this is the era of jazz, right? I mean, there was no jazz in this movie at all, and jazz was huge in the United States, even around the world, really, in the 1930s. There was just none of that in here, which was really weird.
But I have a question for you. So jazz was the prevalent thing, but jazz also, again, correct me if I'm wrong, but jazz was kind of the easy access drug of sorts, to kind of like the gateway drug into the kind of speakeasies and all the kind of other stuff that's kind of sketch, right? So I'm not sure if you look at all the scenes, there's two things. A, there aren't too many scenes when you go into the actual bars, right? You only go at the nightclubs and the echelon where like Al Capone is, right? Like that's highfalutin. So you never go into like the slums of someone actually going to like a speakeasy and drinking, right? The second thing is that, look at the audience. It was always about, again, it's because they didn't really talk about the black people in the 1930s, but it was all white, right? Like the cops were white, the mafia was white, everyone's white. So where would you see the jazz percolate, given that jazz would have been for the younger group, the hip group, the kind of black population? So I'm not sure if jazz would have been like the thing to throw in there, because it's like, technically, if I made a movie today and I was making a biography about me, technically there's rap and there's, dubstep and all that stuff. But you wouldn't hear that in my movie soundtrack. God damn it, I hope I wouldn't have that. But what I'm talking about? Like, just because it was around doesn't mean it had to be there, right?
Yeah, I don't really mean that it had to be like prevalent. It's just that there was nothing at all. It just seemed like it just kind of felt like it was missing a little bit, because I mean they did such a fairly good job of portraying the time period with everything else. I mean, now that you mentioned the scenes, that weren't quite as good as I thought it was. Also, did you notice how cavalier they were with the guns in this movie? Like he at one point, Kevin Costner, Elliot Ness goes in, like when he thinks his daughter was in danger, he has like a gun and he's like holding it like to her head when he's hugging her. And then he just wanders around the train station with, like, when they're supposed to be, like, they're at the end where they're trying to catch the bookie or the bookkeeper. They're trying to be stealth about it, right? like they're supposed to be like, they don't want to give themselves away. That's the reason why they split up. But he's wandering around with like a double-barreled shotgun, Like, that's not very stealth. That was really weird with the way they treated guns in this movie. I don't know how historically accurate that would be, because, I mean, you'd think that they'd at least have some. I mean, even in the 1930s, they would have known not to just go waving around guns when you're trying to be, stealth about something.
Okay, well, I mean, like, listen, man, they had some serious lacks everything back then. I mean, one of the first of like there's so many protocols that weren't emerging yet, right? Like, I mean,
Well, I mean, the FBI didn't even exist at this point. The FBI didn't wasn't even created until 1935. So,
Yeah.
I mean, he literally is from the Treasury Department. That's the reason. So, I mean, that's. I mean, okay. So historically, the biggest thing that bothered me, I guess, was the tax evasion thing. So, from everything I've read about Al Capone and L.S., the tax evasion thing really didn't pop up. They knew about the tax evasion, but that's not what they wanted to be. But that was really, it came across as like the absolute last resort, right? It didn't. Yes, it came across as the last resort here, but because they pushed it so often early, like when they brought the accountant guy in, he pushed tax evasion like right away. Like you could see it coming. I mean, everybody knows that they got Al Capone for tax evasion, so they couldn't really make it a surprise ending.
Yeah.
But the fact that they pushed it so hard so early wasn't really, at least the way I've read several books, is not the way it really happened. It was more, they tried right up until the last minute trying to get him for pretty much anything other than that, because they did not want to take him for tax evasion. But
because basically tax evasion, whereas like capital, like you kill someone, right? That's significant.
But then they knew he was sick, so they wanted to try to get him to jail before he died. So
he did stay out though eventually. Like, I mean, and let him out of Alcatraz, because I've been to Alcatraz several times now, and it struck me when I was there, because I don't really know all that much about American history. But then when I went there, I was like, oh, did he die here? And he's like, no, he retired. And
he served his 11 years, got out and retired to Florida.
Yeah,
with all of his money. I mean, yeah. So he did.
Like he had I can't remember what disease he had pretending to have or something. He had like dementia or something. I can't remember what it was.
He had syphilis.
Oh, okay, yeah, there we go. But I thought it was also some of his cognitive abilities too.
It was whatever STD affects the brain.
Okay.
I can't. It was like I said. It was one of the STDs that makes you go crazy.
Okay. Okay. So the thing is that so you're saying about the issue of the kind of tax evasion, but what's interesting, because I actually did some homework for this one. I didn't know, and this is why it seems really strange to me, because it's strange in the fiction, where his brother earlier, like a couple of years before, got busted for tax evasion because his brother, Al Capone's brother, was complicit with a lot of illegal activity in the Chicago gangland in his own right, and he basically could have seen this a mile. Like, come on, man, when your brother gets busted in, like, at least you couldn't say, look, I'm going to get myself some security to make sure this doesn't happen. Not, hey, I'm going to make sure I consolidate all this information into one bookie and then call it a day. I think that was the kind of weird thing where it's like, dude, how much hubris or stupidity do you have to make that happen, right?
Well, a lot of historians, I mean, they don't know, obviously don't know for sure, but they think because at that time he already had that disease. So they think that was kind of affecting his mind a bit there towards the end, because they didn't obviously portray that at all here in the film. But like I said, they did no character development of Al Capone in this movie at all. But there's a lot of historians that think that not only was his personality kind of portraying him, because he was very, I mean obviously he was egotistical, right? He thought he was above everything, so he didn't. I think that's probably part of what played into it, but they also posit that he just probably didn't think of it because at that point he was already sick. I personally I don't know how they would ever even because the things that there's this book by oh god, I can't remember what his name, some historian from Chicago. He's right, very specific. But anyways, it's a very big book. But anyways, he talks about how his brother and Al Capone didn't really have the greatest of relationships throughout their entire lives. So they were closer towards the end than they were to the middle. Because Al Capone started in New York City, right? So before he moved to Chicago, they were close then after they were born and stuff like that. And then Ralph, or I think his name is Ralph, he like went to like Iowa to become a gangster or something. It was really weird. And then they like reunited in Chicago. So it's possible that their relationship wasn't to the point where maybe he wasn't even paying attention. Who knows?
But then, okay, so let's go through a couple of other things about the fun historic stuff about this. So from your perspective, you're talking about like how the sets were nice and stuff, but I mean, there were a lot of fancies, flights of fancy with the kind of storyline. We talked already about like how Malone was never around with Elliot Ness. We talked about how, you know, there was some plot points that might not necessarily make sense. But I mean, what do you think from a kind of historian standpoint, like, at least it gets the message across, or it's the wrong message? Because, you know, as I said, I was doing some homework, and, you know, as you described, Elliot Ness was kind of, you know, had multiple wives, right? Didn't even have a kid, so they kind of portray it a certain way. But do you think from like a general sense of, say, Al Capone being taken down by Elliot Ness, that big kind of message, does that really resonate? People there are people that like, you know, want to name buildings after Elliot Ness and stuff, and then basically there's like a group in America that's like, nope, not name stuff after Elliot Ness because he didn't do all that much. And you're like, really? So what's your read on this, Mr. American?
So the most of the things that people know about Elliot Ness come from movies and novels. They're not actually true. After Al Capone was put in prison, Elliot Ness moved on to he went to the alcohol tax division, because like right after this, prohibition was repealed, so alcohol came back, so he could no longer bust people for selling alcohol. So he went to he stayed in the Treasury Department. He didn't start working for like there's kind of was it that John Dillinger movie with Johnny Depp that had Elliot Ness in it? Like, he wasn't even part of that story.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, like after he put Al Capone away, he stopped going after gangsters completely. He went to he started collecting taxes on alcohol, and then he ran for mayor of Cleveland.
Yeah.
And he got married a couple times. So I think that the portrayal I think that the portrayal of Elliot Ness in these types of stories is just because they need a good guy, right? They need a hero.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they didn't even do. I mean, in this movie, the Untouchables was really four people. It was the Malone, the accountant, Ness, and the sharpshooter guy. Right. The Untouchables did exist. They just had 6 people to start out with, and then they moved up to 10. And I felt one of the things that they could have done a lot better was, like a lot more. I mean, raids and stuff. It was really weird that the raid that they chose to cover the most was the one where they got, you know, the on horseback and went to the Wild Wild West or whatever, which was, by the way, it wasn't the Wild Wild West. It was in Canada. I mean, it was like it looked like it was like the border between. You expected some American Indians or something to come around and. But it was
because I was like, so wait, where is this happening? Because I don't know where exactly it's happening, unless it happens like in like way out west. It was like, you know, you wouldn't, like if this is like across the river or you know, across from like, you know, the Michigan. I mean, you know that we would have cops, right? Like, I'm just like.
They were either trying to make a play on the popularity of Western movies, or they were making fun of Canadians because of the mounted police. Those are the only two options, because it's really weird, because I'm pretty sure they were trying to say that alcohol was coming in from Canada across the Detroit River.
Yeah.
Okay, so first of all, where was Detroit? I mean, this was like a field or something. I mean, it was like there was like a cliff there, and it was. I mean, was that supposed to be the bridge there in Detroit? Because I mean,
that's not happening.
Detroit did exist in the 1930s. I mean, it's really weird. I was like, that is the raid that they decided to focus on the most. I mean, and that took up a good, I don't know, 20, 25 minutes. I mean, him killing the dead guy was really cool. That kind of redeemed the scene, but it just felt really weird that in the middle of this movie it became a western for like 20 minutes.
Yeah, I think it did a bunch of things. I think there was a certain levity. I'll admit, like when you have an accountant who's never picked up a gun, just suddenly like go, sharp shooting shotguns.
You almost expected him to go yippee-ki-yay, motherfucker.
But it sounded funny that he's kind of doing that stuff. So my take is the following on this. I think in the movie they just want to break from like your typical Chicago gangland movies where it's always like, yeah, you see here, I'm gonna kill him, yeah, right? that kind of thing. Like I think they want to break that kind of thing. De Palma, the director, probably want to step out of that because I mean if you do that, remember we're still in the heyday of the Godfather movies, right? Remember, so the Godfather movies, Goodfellas, all these movies are coming out, and this is like kind of like, okay, how do we break away from it so that we kind of liven it up? Because there's only so much of like gangland Chicago that you can show. I also think that, as I said before, it really needed to break the pace, because it really wanted to reinforce the fact that it wasn't just locally that he was busting Capone, but he was cutting off like the supply. Which I think was really important because then that would really make more for a dramatic arc where it's like Al Capone's not just ticked off that he's like a wasp in his bonnet kind of thing. It's actually Young Ness is messing up his entire supply chain, right? So I see that as kind of useful too, right? To just show it that way. It makes the RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, look like they're idiots when they kind of do a preemptive strike thing.
Well, it was weird. I mean, the whole scene was.
I can just mention just one little observation. Now that I'm thinking about this, did you notice that basically on the Untouchables, it's only the Untouchables that drink that end up dying? Did you notice that? Like the little accountant guy, he just takes a little swig from the whole like the barrel.
And then you see
Malone.
Malone have a good drink there at the end. Yeah. That is interesting.
Yeah, so I thought that was interesting because it's like the horror movie rules, right? Like, again, kind of like 80s tropes where it's like if kids have sex, they're gonna die, right? Like you know what I'm talking about? So teens are bullies, they're gonna die, right? So in this movie, it's like when you drink, you will. If you're a good guy, you will die, right? So I just thought that was an interesting kind of follow through. And anyways, I'm glad you liked the movie because I was kind of concerned. Like I was watching it again, going, that's a really 80s thing. I'm not sure if you would have been like. I mean, I take it with a grain of salt because I was raised and I was able to watch that stuff. But for a person like you, I mean, you're just like, damn, this is a bad production value or something.
It really wasn't. The action scenes were kind of, mad. But then you got to remember, this is the same guy who did Mission Impossible. So,
wait, De Palma did Mission Impossible?
Yeah, he did the first Mission Impossible. He also did. All right, so and this is a good point, Vince. I think that the reason why he maybe one of the reasons why he pulled out of Chicago and did that horseback scene was because because you're right, he was trying to get away from the whole stereotypical gangster thing, but also because he did Scarface, like with Al Pacino.
Okay, yep.
So I think that because if he wanted to make this so much, he wanted to differentiate it more, from that, because I mean that was a movie.
Yeah.
He didn't really. I think that's also a possible reason why Al Capone didn't feature more in the movie. Because he already did a movie based from the point of view of the gangster. Now he wanted to do one from the hero's perspective. So, that's one. Because I had no idea that this director also did Scarface. I mean, because Scarface came out 4 years before this movie.
Really? It came out in 1986 or 85?
All right, so The Untouchables came out in 87, and Scarface came out in 83.
Oh my gosh! Oh wow! Okay.
Huh. And then in 1996, this guy did Mission Impossible. so it's like 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon, only the 6 Degrees of Tom Cruise.
Yeah.
All right. So what would you give this movie, Vince?
You know what? I watched. I thought I would give it higher, but then I watched it again and I was like, okay. Like I'll say it's 3.5 out of 5 for me. But to be fair, I kind of in my mind had it as more of a 4 because I remember watching this when I was younger and just being like, yeah, that's so cool. Like maybe it's because I'm kind of getting old and seeing like they overly fictionalized and took lots of license. And really, I have no problem with more gritty, realistic biopic kind of movies. So maybe I just kind of was, looking at through with rosy lenses or something. But I'd still say it's a good movie. 3.5 out of 5, man.
All right, so I would give this. All right, I would go ahead and give it a 4 out of 5. It was a good movie. It's very rewatchable. It's not something that I maybe would go out and deliberately rewatch. But if I saw this on TV, I'd like, oh yeah, this is a good movie. I'd watch it again. I really enjoy, despite my qualms about jazz or whatever. I mean, whatever. You can argue for or against this not having jazz in it, but the soundtrack was really, really good in spots, and it's the
It's the same as the Yudley, isn't it?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure. All I know is that the tempo, like when the opening credits has a fantastic soundtrack, and then during all the action scenes, you can just, it's kind of like it was very John Williams-esque, because whenever John Williams does a villain scene, he always has that one theme. But where this one wasn't really a theme, but more had the same tempo. Had a beat to it. It was very good. I actually might download there were some parts where were really weird, like where they're sneaking around and you have like violins going in the background. But the beat, the times where there was like an up tempo kind of thing I really enjoyed it. So I would say 4 out of 5 for.
Just because you and I both are kind of nerdy about music. It was done by I believe it was Ennio Morricone, like the guy that does the Good, the Bad, the Ugly, like the spaghetti westerns. I mean, was it him? I think it was, right. I can't remember, but like you could actually tell that there were instances, because when you were raised earlier, why didn't they use jazz? Like I was thinking back, like there were instances when I was watching the movie where I was like, music that they're playing is like there's a harmonica or something like that, right? And you're like, a harmonica in the 1930s? I don't quite get it. Maybe I'm thinking more Herbert Hoover, like Hooverville kind of things, like homeless kind of favela, like shantytown things. But I was like, I don't see any of that, and I don't know why the kind of harmonica comes into the discussion. So I just thought that there were some instances where the music kind of was a little bit off, but to be fair, the composer is a very well accomplished, guy who does scores.
Yeah. Yeah, like I said, I really enjoyed it. This is just something I thought about. One thing that they didn't cover in this movie at all, and it is kind of a really big miss. That now that the more I think about it, is that they did not talk about J. Edgar Hoover at all. And he was like,
very quickly, because it's like, what are you gonna name the kid? John.
Yeah, that was literally the only mention of J. Edgar Hoover, right? And that kid doesn't exist in real life, right? So, right, but it's just that he was the one that was so obsessed with getting Capone and all the gangsters and stuff. I mean, that's how he made his name and rose up and became the first director of the FBI, was from going after these gangsters. And he didn't make the movie at all, it was very weird. But I don't know where they really would have put him in. They would have had to make him a bigger character if they were going to put him in at all.
Okay, so this is a bit of a sidebar, and I don't know if this is going to include in the recording, but I think it's really important that you enlighten me on this, because I understand J. Edgar Hoover. I'm not going to talk about the Leonardo DiCaprio movie. I'm going to talk about just like him and J. Edgar Hoover in American culture, right? So I understand that he was really behind the kind of McCarthyism, like the whole kind of Red Scare stuff. And, he also, I don't know if it's hypocritically or not, but like he was also like a cross-dresser or something like that. So, like, what is the American sentiment behind it? Because when I heard that thing along J. Edgar Hoover, I was thinking, wait, that's like saying, I need my kid Kevin Spacey. Like, it's something that if you knew at the time, you probably wouldn't do it, right? So what's going on with J. Edgar Hoover in this particular context?
I'm not sure. All I know is the reason why he has such a big name in the United States is because of the fact that he was there forever. Like he was started in the 1930s and he was there until like 81 or something.
Yeah.
Crazy.
But just his longevity, and that's the only thing. It's like that's the crazy thing. Man, you're American. You should know like all the kind of people in there. Like,
part of the reason. All right, so you got to remember part of the reasons why when he was still around the big. I mean, most of the things you probably learned that were bad about him, at least in terms of like the cross-dressing stuff, you probably learned since he died. So I mean, the zeitgeist or whatever of his legacy, I guess now it probably is more tainted than it would have been when he was alive. But he wasn't well liked when he was alive. He was just powerful. Like you always get the sense when you read stuff about him is that he had a lot of maybe like a little black book of dirt on stayed in power so long. I mean, in some movies and stuff like that, he comes across as the shining example of searching for justice in America, and he's wearing a cape and it has a big S on his chest or whatever. But as with most things, I mean, he was probably just as corrupt as the rest of them. It's just you don't know it. And it's also, I mean, a lot of this stuff you got to remember that we get so kind of bogged down in the fact that everything now today is a scandal, and it appears on Twitter every 30 seconds. The whole woke thing. Back then it was newspapers, right? I mean, so if you found out something about it, you probably found out about it weeks and weeks after it happened, or maybe months, or you probably didn't know about it at all. Because you got to remember the whole newspaper thing was. I mean, we talk about divisive media today, but media back then was just as bad then because it was owned by like 5 guys. So and chances are Hoover probably knew a lot of those guys and had dirt on them or something. I don't know. I don't know. He's a very interesting character, but I don't know. It was just weird that he didn't, something in this movie.
Well, anyways, I'm just curious because I think that these kind of tangential references are good at contextualizing discussion, right? Like it would make no sense if you said, "Hey, I'm gonna post that stuff on Facebook." Like it's out of sync, right? But when you're talking about these sprinkles of historic nuggets there to contextualize things, I was just like, I never really thought that J. Edgar Hoover was going to be seen as the really good guy, or I'd name the kid after him. So there's a small little detail there.
Well, I mean, at that time, it's that scene there, Vince, is kind of weird. Because yes, J. Edgar Hoover would have been Elliot Ness's boss, right? But he wasn't famous.
Kid after your boss, it was even more weird.
That's literally all that would have been him naming it after his boss, because at that point J. Edgar Hoover wasn't he didn't have at that point he didn't have a building named after him, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, he does now. He has a legend now, good or bad, and he has all this stuff, floating around. Some of it's true, some of it's not true, and we going back through his papers, and it turns out he wasn't a fantastic guy. Maybe now, if you're a big FBI fan, or maybe you name your child after him now, everyone knows who he is. But then, I mean, very few people probably would have known who J. Edgar Hoover was, because I mean, like I said, the FBI didn't even exist. At that time, I think J. Edgar Hoover, I think he was like a deputy secretary or something. He held some political appointee position. I think I'm wrong about that, but he wasn't the secretary of the Treasury or something. I mean, it was just some worker drone at that point. He was working to the point where he would eventually be appointed the first director of the FBI. So it's that whole scene was just really weird. Probably, all right. It was a good movie. All right, Ricky, man, you gotta watch that movie. It's some good action scenes. And all it needed was a car chase.
Well, they had a horseback chase. They also had a quasi-car theme.
Yes, it had the horses. They replaced the car chase with the horses. All right.
It's like, hey, what happened to him? He's in the car.
Yeah. It even had that would have came across a lot better if it had been Sean Connery saying that line, because I mean, obviously it wouldn't have made sense in the story, but it would have played off Bond, because Bond has all those one-liners.
Exactly.
Right. All right. Anyway, so if you want to get in contact with us, you can do so. Any number of places at the 3Cast on Twitter. I'm at MTWB. Vince is VWHUI. Ricky, who's not here, is Ricky_Williams1. You can also follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/the 3Cast. You can also follow us. I don't know. I'm sure there are other the 3castshow@gmail.com is the email address. I'm sure I'm forgetting one, but I don't have the show notes here because I'm on Windows, and Windows is terrible. It's just got. This is the second day in a row I've had to switch into Windows because I got this new microphone set up, and it doesn't work on Linux, and it's driving me absolutely. I'm depressed. Is what I am.
I don't know.
Problems is what I got. Anyways, that is it for us this time. I have no clue what we're doing next. I think Ricky has the next choice.
Yep.
Although, didn't we just do Frozen?
Oh, it's good.
I did the Bond. So we did Frozen, then Bond, then we did this. So we're back to Ricky again. So we'll have to get Ricky to choose something.
Alrighty. Okay.
Alright. Talk to you next time.
Alright. Take care.